Hello, good morning, and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. These are the topics that we shall be discussing today from the international edition of The Hindu newspaper. But before we start, an important announcement. Those civil services aspirants who are considering online coaching can, or should I say, should consider our online classroom program for CSE 2025. We launched this program on the 13th of February this year. The first batch is complete. Now we are launching another batch from tomorrow, where Mukesh Sir would be teaching geography from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. If you need to know more details about this program, you can reach out to us on this number. We are hungry. It is our mission and our dream to teach every single civil services aspirant. And if you are considering coaching, I would request you to consider this program, where in 1,000 plus hours of live classes, we will cover everything that you need to crack the civil services examination. And all these classes shall be taught by India's leading educators. Also, I notice all the comments that you make on our YouTube channel, and you're eager to know the launch of our Conquer Prelims 2024. And I'm happy to share with you that we are launching this course in the first week of May. And if you're liking these initiatives, if you're liking the announcement of this initiative, do like this video, drop in your comments, subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, and share the links of these classes with your friends and fellow aspirants. Let's get started and look at topic number 1 from page number 1 of today's international edition of the Hindu newspaper, relevant for GS paper 2. Delhi Chief Minister Mr. Kejriwal has been arrested by Enforcement Directorate. Clear, but he continues to remain the Chief Minister. A petition was filed in the Delhi High Court asking the Delhi High Court that we should remove Mr. Kejriwal as the Chief Minister. Why? Because his continuance would disrupt law and order, and it would also violate, break down of the constitutional machinery of the state. Look at me carefully. Article 356 of the Constitution, it talks about imposition of president's rule in a state where there is breakdown of constitutional machinery. But look at the wording. It says if the president is satisfied on the report of the governor or even otherwise. There are a couple of issues that we will have to discuss so that you are able to understand this topic. The point that I'm trying to highlight is, how can judiciary even accept such a petition? Look at me carefully. Article 356 says if the president is satisfied on the report of the governor or even otherwise. That means the report of the governor is not necessary for the imposition of a president's rule in a state. Similarly, we have Article 239 capital AB, which talks about breakdown of constitutional machinery in the Union Territory of Delhi, National Capital Territory of Delhi, where on the basis of the report of the Lieutenant Governor, the President can impose President's rule. But the point is, what is this or even otherwise? That means the report of the Governor is not important, is not necessary for the imposition of President's rule. Couple of years ago, Andhra Pradesh High Court, what it said we will investigate, we will look into, we will inquire whether the allegations of corruption or the breakdown of law and order in Andhra Pradesh would merit us that we can advise the president that you should dismiss the state government and impose president's rule in the state of Andhra. how did the Andhra Pradesh High Court come to such a reasoning? Because of the wording of Article 356, which says if the president is satisfied on the report of the governor or even otherwise, that means even without the report of the governor, which may be on the basis of the report of a high court, the president can impose president's rule in a state. But thankfully, this verdict or this ruling or this judgment was overturned, was stayed by the Supreme Court. Why? Because it goes against the separation of powers. That's not the power of the judiciary to recommend president's rule in a state. And that's exactly what the Delhi High Court has said. That this matter, whether there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery or not, this is for the other wing of the government to examine. It is for the president to examine, based on the report of the lieutenant governor, whether there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery or not. Yes, there are practical difficulties. With chief minister in jail, what if the chief secretary has to present an important file to the chief minister, but there is no chief minister? The chief minister is inside the prison, is inside the jail. So there are practical difficulties, which the court has realized. But again, succumbing and bowing down to the separation of powers, which itself is part of the basic structure, the court has said that this is not for us to examine. It is for the other organ of the state to examine. And it has rejected, dismissed this plea of removing Mr. Kejriwal as the chief minister. But that's not the only point. Enforcement Directorate, it was previously Enforcement Unit when it was set up in 1956. And at that time, it was placed under the Department of Economic Affairs. A year later, the name was changed to Enforcement Directorate, and it was then placed under the Department of Revenue under the Finance Ministry. And it is this agency which is responsible for investigating what? Economic crimes. Economic crimes related to the violation of foreign exchange laws, for example, FEMA. Also, Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Now, what is this money laundering? And how did this name, money laundering, came to be used? There was a time in United States where liquor was banned in some states, where there was a prohibition on liquor. What bootleggers would do? They would illegally sell liquor in return of cash. Now they have a lot of cash, but this is unaccounted money. This is what we call black money. Now this unaccounted money, illegitimate money, is to be made legitimized. It is to be made accountable. And what these bootleggers did, they started opening laundry shops where they would do the laundry and in return would ask for cash from the customers. So tomorrow, if an agency would ask these laundry shop owners, where did you get this money from? They would say that we are not bootleggers, we are not illegally selling liquor, we are in the business of laundry. That means these washing machines were used to convert illegitimate money into legitimate money. And that is what is money laundering. The case against Mr. Kejriwal, or for that matter, Aam Aadmi Party now, and why this is significant, I'll tell you. There is a case called Delhi liquor scam or excise scam, which has now been, this was a policy which was implemented in 2021-22, which has now been overturned, replaced, junked. What was the policy? Instead of having government operate the liquor shops, we will allow, the government said, the Delhi government said, we will allow the private players to operate these liquor shops. And what we will gain, what the government will gain, massive revenue, because we are opening the private sector, we are opening this sector to the private industries. And then there was the allegation that basically the ruling political party in Delhi would receive the kickbacks, would receive the money in the form of bribes for opening the sector to private players. And it was argued that close to 100 crores were given as bribes. But then this money, which is unaccounted money, which is illegitimate money, was laundered according to Enforcement Directorate, and this money was used by Aam Aadmi Party to campaign to contest the elections to the Goa Legislative Assembly. Mr. Manish Sisodia, who was the excise minister when this policy was launched, has been arrested. And now Delhi Chief Minister, Mr. Kejriwal, also has been arrested. But the point is, when the bail application was filed by Mr. Manish Sisodia before the Supreme Court asked if the real beneficiary of the scam is the political party Aam Aadmi Party. Why is Aam Aadmi Party not an accused listed in this case? And now, according to various reports, Aam Aadmi Party can be made an accused in this case. Now, what is the significance of this development? Listen to me carefully. There is something called vicarious liability. What is this vicarious liability? For example, I'm running a construction company and I'm laying down roads. There is one employee that I have who is riding a bulldozer. Now, this bulldozer rams into your house or your apartment and destroys it. Who will pay the compensation? This driver or me, the owner of this company? Me, because that is what we call vicarious liability. That means I will be liable of the actions of others, my employees, for example. Similarly, what the ED has done, Arvind Kejriwal, because of vicarious liability, is accused in this case. Why? He may not have directly done this, but he is accused. Why? Because he is the Chief Minister of Delhi, Cabinet took this decision, and as the head of the Cabinet, you have approved this policy. So vicarious liability is on you, that is why you are under arrest, you are accused. But not just this. Who is the real beneficiary of this scam? Now, we don't know whether this is true or not, but according to ED, if this is a scam, who is the real beneficiary? Aam Aadmi Party. But who is the convener of Aam Aadmi Party? Mr. Kejriwal. So as the convener of Aam Aadmi Party, the vicarious liability is on you because you are the real beneficiary and you have laundered this money, and this money has been used to fund election campaign to Goa Legislative Assembly. So vicarious liability is on you and you are accused. But normally, Prevention of Money Laundering Act, it applies to individuals, it applies to companies. But Aam Aadmi Party is a political party. Political party is not a company. So how can this law be made applicable to Aam Aadmi Party as a political party, but it is not a company? It can still be. Why? Because what is a company? A group of individuals, or should we say an association of individuals. An association of individuals is a company. What is a political party? Section 29A of the Representation of the People Act 1951, it talks about the registration of a political party. And it says, political party is what? Association of citizens. So if according to this law, association of citizens is a political party, which means association of individuals is a political party, association of individual is a company, so political party can be equated with that of a company, and Prevention of Money Laundering Act can be invoked in this case. Now you will say, sir, because of this, what will happen? If a company is accused under Money Laundering Act, what will happen to the assets of this company? Assets can be frozen. Assets can be confiscated. Same would apply to Aam Aadmi Party, which means the bank accounts of Aam Aadmi Party, the assets of Aam Aadmi Party may be confiscated, may be frozen by Enforcement Directorate. And at a time when elections are ongoing, it would cripple Aam Aadmi Party's functioning as a political party. It would render it useless, which means it can't campaign effectively for the upcoming Lok Sabha elections. Whether that will happen or not, let's wait and watch, but this is what you need to understand from this topic. Delhi High Court dismisses plea to remove Kejriwal as Chief Minister. Clear? Let's look at another important article. We have Article 22 of the Constitution, which is a fundamental right which comes into picture after an individual has been arrested. If I am arrested, I have a fundamental right. I should be informed of the grounds on which I am arrested so that I can have my lawyer. And I have the fundamental right to choose a legal practitioner of my choice. But not just that, within 24 hours, I should be produced before the nearest magistrate as well. That's the fundamental right available to me under Article 22. But just like other fundamental rights, this fundamental right also is not absolute because there are exceptions. The protections under Article 22 will not apply to those who are enemy aliens. That means citizens of those countries with which India is at war. And these protections will not also apply to those who are under preventive detention. Detention is of two types. Either it is punitive or it is preventive. Punitive detention, I have committed a crime for which the court has sentenced me to 10 years in jail. Those 10 years that I will stay in jail, in prison, that is part of my punishment, punitive detention. But preventive detention is, I may not have committed a crime, but I'm still detained. Why? Because the police suspects, the state suspects that I might commit a crime. I might violate law and order. I might break down public order. That is what we call preventive detention. House arrest is one common way of putting people under preventive detention, which means if the state suspects that you are able to commit a crime, you may commit a crime, you can be placed in custody. That's not part of your punishment, but you are being prevented from committing a crime. And both center, which means the parliament, as well as the state legislatures, they have the right to make laws on preventive detention. But for how long can you be arrested and detained under a preventive detention law? Constitution says 3 months. Can you be detained under preventive detention law even after 3 months? Yes. But for that, you have to set up an advisory board. This advisory board will consist of a high court judge or somebody who was a high court judge or somebody who is qualified to be appointed as a high court judge. And this advisory board will have to then mention the reason and approve whether this person should be detained even beyond a period of 3 months. It has to record that there should be a sufficient cause for such detention to continue. Then what is the matter? According to Supreme Court, these advisory boards should not be like rubber stamping authorities, where the state is keeping and placing people under preventive detention beyond a period of 3 months as well. When the matter is brought before the opinion of the advisory board, without asking additional information, without going too deep into this allegation, is just mechanically approving the detention beyond a period of 3 months. So what Supreme Court has said? Supreme Court has said that these advisory boards should not be mere rubber stamping authorities. It need to ask questions. Whether in this particular case, you should not only be satisfying the eyes of the authority, but the eyes of the law as well. Because in the eyes of the authority, you should approve the detention of this person, preventive detention beyond 3 months as well. But whether in the eyes of the law, this detention should be allowed to continue or not, that is where these advisory boards will have to apply their individual mind. The case in question was an individual in Telangana was arrested under the Telangana Prevention of Dangerous Activities Act. And he was labeled as a gunda. Why? Because he would snatch the Mangal Sutra of the women. So he had a criminal past. But advisory board further approved the preventive detention beyond 3 months without seeking more details. The government has said that he is a threat to public order. Supreme Court said there is a difference between a threat to public order and a threat to law and order. You and me have a fight in the middle of a road. This is a law and order problem because it affects you and me and some individuals. But if it's a public order, for example, strikes, bunds, it affects the public as a whole, society as a whole. So there is a difference. And if this gunda is a threat to law and order, that is for the police to tackle. The mere reason that the police is unable to deal with the incidents of law and order, that does not justify imposing preventive detention laws on individuals. So the court made a careful distinction between public order and law and order. And what the court said, a problem of law and order affected only a few individuals, but an issue of public order influenced the community or the public at large or even the country. Long story short, we have Article 22, which comes into picture after an individual has been arrested. So once you are arrested, you should be informed of the grounds on which you are arrested. You have to be produced before the magistrate within 24 hours of your arrest. But this guarantee does not apply to those who are under preventive detention laws. But for how long can you be put under preventive detention laws? 3 months. Can you be put under preventive detention laws beyond a period of 3 months? Yes, if the advisory board agrees. But what the court has said, this advisory board has to implement its mind, apply its mind. Whether in this particular case, not only in the eyes of the authority, but in the eyes of the law, this detention should be justified. Ask questions, seek more material, hear the détenu, hear the person against whom the accusations are, and then come to a conclusion whether this preventive detention should be extended or it should be scrapped. That is what you need to understand from this topic. Let's look at something else. A living will, so the terminally ill can avoid the indignities of prolonged hospital care. What happened on March 12? A gathering of 30 people, mostly doctors. What they did, they signed living wills in Kerala. What is this living will? For that, let's trace the history. There used to be Section 309 of Indian Penal Code, which criminalized attempt to suicide, which means if I commit suicide and it is successful, the law cannot catch me because I am too dead to be caught. But if this suicide fails, that means attempt to suicide fails, I am a criminal, I will be arrested and I will be prosecuted. If Article 21 talks about right to life, shouldn't the immediate corollary be right to die as well? That was the matter before the court in P. Rathina versus Union of India, 1994. If the Constitution of India provides right to life, the corollary should be you should have right to die as well. And the court said, yes, you have right to die. And this Section 309 of Indian Penal Code, which criminalizes attempt to suicide, is unconstitutional. But 2 years later, a constitution bench in Shrimati Gyan Kaur versus State of Punjab, 1996, it said, no, you have right to life, there is no right to die. When there is no right to die, that means this Section 309 of Indian Penal Code is constitutional. But something else has happened. The year was 1973. Aruna Shanbag, she was a young nurse at King Edward Memorial Hospital in Bombay. It was Bombay then, Mumbai now. Now what happened? She was assaulted by a ward boy. And because of that assault, she entered into a permanent vegetative state. A state from which there is no hope of recovery. She can't recover. Brain dead. Years later, her friend Pinky Virami, she approached the Supreme Court and said, if I have right to life, Does this expression right to life means physical act of breathing alone? That means my friend Aruna Shanbag, she is breathing. She is alive. But does that satisfy right to life under Article 21? Or should it be right to live with dignity? She is not able to live with dignity. She is not able to change into different clothes. She is not able to eat anything on her own. She is not able to listen to any songs. So she is not living the life of dignity. Have mercy on her. Allow mercy killing. And this mercy killing is what is known as euthanasia. Supreme Court, in this Aruna Ramachandra Shanbag versus Union of India 2011, what it did, it accepted and recognized passive euthanasia. Passive euthanasia is allowed. Active euthanasia is not allowed. What's the difference? Active euthanasia is where you are using an external device or an external injection or an external medicine to kill me. I am in a lot of pain because of a medical condition. What you are basically doing, you are injecting me with something, a medicine, a tablet, anything, because of which I am dead. That is active euthanasia. That means an active external source is required to kill an individual. This, the court said, we will not allow. Although it is allowed in some countries. We saw recently a prime minister of a country and his partner, they killed themselves. Practice something called mercy killing or active euthanasia. Let me know in the comment section what is the name, to which country does that prime minister and his partner belong to. But be that as it may, what is passive euthanasia? There is an individual who is alive because of an external support. For example, he is on a ventilator support. If you switch off the ventilator support, the patient will die. In active euthanasia, an external device is used to kill an individual. In passive euthanasia, an external device is used to keep a patient alive. If you switch off that ventilator support, the patient will die. And the court said this passive euthanasia is allowed. But for that, law should be made by the parliament. Until the time law is made by the parliament, we will allow passive euthanasia, but it has to be done on a case-to-case basis, which means doctors should agree that there is no hope for recovery for this individual. The family members of this individual should agree that we want to kill this individual. We want to have a mercy on this individual. We want to switch off the ventilator support. And you have to go and seek permission from the High Court concerned. Even after this judgment, Aruna Shanbag could not get the benefit out of it. And it was in 2015 that she died after remaining in a permanent vegetative state for more than 40 years. The cause of her death was considered to be pneumonia. Why, despite this judgment, she could not get the benefit of passive euthanasia? Because the question before the court was, who is the family member of Aruna Shanbag? Because family members have to be in agreement. The court said if there is no immediate family, then we have to look at who is the next best friend of Aruna Shanbag. Pinky Virami, the petitioner, said, I am the best friend. I am the next friend. But the nurses who were taking care of Aruna Shanbag at the King Edward Memorial Hospital in Mumbai, they said that we are the next friend. And the court ultimately relied on these nurses, since these nurses who were taking care of her, they did not wish for passive euthanasia. They did not wish for Aruna Shanbag to be subjected to mercy killing. Ultimately, she could not be given the benefit. But this was in 2011. And in 2018, something else happened. What happened in 2018? In common cause case, the Supreme Court said right to living will is a fundamental right under Article 21. What is this right to living will? Who was taking a decision on behalf of Aruna Shanbag? Either her family members or the next best friend. Why can't we extend this power to her? When she was healthy, when she was in the pink of her health, when she was in her proper mindset, she will write down the living will. That tomorrow, if I am in a position where I am unable to decide medical treatment for me, at that point in time, this is the document that the doctor should follow. In fact, Law Commission, in its 196th report in 2011, had said that a doctor who obeys the instructions of a competent patient. I am a competent patient. I am in my sound mind, body, but I am suffering from a disease, a terminal disease from where there is no hope of recovery, survival. And I'm telling the doctor that you should not give me this treatment. You should withdraw the treatment. You should not treat me. And if the doctor obeys by the guidance, by the command of this competent patient, this won't be considered as a breach of professional duty, and this won't be considered an offense. And in 2018, in Common Cause case, the Supreme Court said, this right to living will, once it is prepared, for example, what is a will? You have a property, you have commercial establishments, you have companies, you have gold, you have other assets. And after your death, how these assets are going to be distributed amongst your kith and kin. That's something that you write down even when you are alive. Similarly, if at all it comes to a point where you can't take a decision on your own, so far as what is the medical treatment that you should be subjected to. For example, you don't want to be put on a ventilator support because this is additional trauma, torture for a patient. You can write it down in this living will. And this right to living will is a fundamental right under Article 21. But what you need to understand is that some guidelines were issued in 2018, how this living will is to be made and protected. And all these guidelines were considered to be unworkable. Unworkable guidelines. Unworkable guidelines in the sense that if I have to prepare this living will, I need 2 independent witnesses as well. And then I need to get this living will signed by Judicial Magistrate First Class. Now, where do I find this Judicial Magistrate First Class? And I have to have this physical copy at the District Collector's office. But not just this. If there is an accident or if I'm suffering from a terminal disease, I am admitted to a hospital. The hospital, what it will do, it will constitute a board. And it should have 3 expert medical practitioners, 3 expert doctors. And these experts should have 20 years experience, at least 20 years experience in the field of medicine. And then they will examine my case and decide whether this passive euthanasia should be practiced or not, whether we should have mercy on this individual or not, whether we should withdraw medical treatment or not. And once they are satisfied, they will forward it to the district collector. Now, district collector will constitute another medical board. Again experts, again with massive experience. And once this medical board also agrees with the first board, then what will happen? This decision will be forwarded to this Judicial Magistrate First Class, who will now go visit, examine the patient, visit the patient and then give the approval. All this was unworkable. Why? Because going to get Judicial Magistrate First Class signature on your living will, then storing it with the District Collector's office, then getting 2 independent witnesses. And at the same time, if I'm in a rural area, how will a hospital in this rural area will have medical practitioners which will have at least 20 years experience? So all this was unworkable. And then in 2023, last year, new guidelines were issued. New guidelines, instead of hospital and collector forming 2 separate medical boards, now the hospital itself will form the medical board. And instead of having medical practitioners, doctors with 20 years experience, now we will have 5 years experience. Instead of getting this living will attested by judicial magistrate first class, what we need to do, this attestation should be done by a gazetted officer, any notary. Instead of the requirement that magistrate's approval has been replaced by intimation to magistrate. Because initially, magistrate has to give the approval that, okay, perform this passive euthanasia. First, I will visit. Now, instead of approval, you just need to intimate this magistrate because the medical board has taken the decision. The medical board has to communicate its decision within 48 hours. Previously, there was no time limit. It would have been like a guideline under anti-defection law for a speaker, because there is no time limit within which the speaker has to take a decision on disqualification petitions. Now, this medical board has to communicate its decision within 48 hours. 2018 guidelines required 2 witnesses and a signature by the magistrate. Now, as I told you, a notary or a gazetted officer can sign this living will in the presence of 2 witnesses. And this living will has to be stored digitally. And in case the medical board set up by the hospital refuses to give the permission to perform this passive euthanasia, there is also an option for the skin to approach the High Court. So if the topic in news was a living will so the terminally ill can avoid the indignities of prolonged hospital care, you need to understand the history behind how this right to living will became part of Article 21 of the Constitution, thanks to this case known as Common Cause versus Union of India. Common Cause is a non-governmental organization, an NGO. Clear? Let's look at another topic. Easily provoked. We have New Delhi and we have Washington, the capital cities of the world's largest and the world's oldest democracy. The relationship is very strong, very solid. So there was a time when sanctions were imposed on us by United States because we dared to perform nuclear tests. But after that, because of the middle class, growing middle class, because of the big economy in India, because of the big domestic market in India, now these developed countries are bowing down before India. And despite the fact that India is not an ally of United States, India is still a major defense partner of United States. And the relationship is very strong, which is reflected in the 2008 Indo-US nuclear deal, which ended India's nuclear apartheid. Because when we tested nuclear weapons, there was a ban on us from getting uranium from any other country, because the allegation was that we will use this uranium for nuclear weapon manufacturing. But then this nuclear apartheid ended with the signing of Indo-US nuclear deal of 2008. And we have also signed lots and lots of partnerships with the United States, whether it is logistics agreement, whether it is COMCASA communications agreement, so on and so forth. All these agreements we have signed with the United States. In fact, the trade is going rock solid. In security relationship, we coordinate with each other. We are part of Quad. In fact, yesterday in the newspaper analysis, we discussed Tiger Triumph, a bilateral exercise, tri-series exercise between India and US, where all the 3 services of India and US, they participate in this exercise. So if the relationship is very strong, but there are still some issues. Issues in the sense, the post of India's ambassador to Washington is still not filled. What is the other issue? The other issue is the constant interference by Washington in India's domestic affairs. Washington has now commented on the arrest of Mr. Kejriwal by the Enforcement Directorate. Why do you interfere in India's internal affairs? Washington also has now commented because some of the bank accounts belonging to the Congress party have been frozen. Why? Because there is some tax liability. Now, in the election season, according to Washington, if you're crippling an opposition political party with funds by getting the funds confiscated, why is Washington interfering in India's domestic affairs? But not just this. There is Canada, there is Germany, and then there is United States. Mr. Nijjar, a Canadian citizen, but a Khalistani sympathizer, he was killed in Canada. And Canada quickly said that India is responsible. India's intelligence agencies are responsible for assassinating a Canadian citizen on the soil of Canada. India denied this, but then United States said that we have a citizen, Mr. Panun, and there have been assassination attempts on that individual who is a Khalistani sympathizer. India said, we are going to look into these allegations. Germany also commented on the arrest of Mr. Kejriwal by the Enforcement Directorate. So these foreign entities commenting on India's internal affairs. For that, you need to understand 5 eyes. What are these 5 eyes? Can be asked in your prelims examination. It's basically an intelligence sharing group. Because when Canada accused India of killing Mr. Nijjar, experts in India said that we can't, on the face of it, rubbish these rumors or these allegations. Because Canada is not an ordinary country. It's part of 5 eyes. And who are the other members of these 5 eyes? There is Canada, there is United States, there is Australia, there is New Zealand, and UK. These countries, they share intelligence with each other. And that is how Canada said, we have shared all the allegations and all the proofs that we have regarding India's involvement in the killing of Nijjar with our 5 eyes counterparts. But be that as it may, if United States is interfering in India's domestic affairs, and this is not the first time, when Citizenship Amendment Act was passed, United States commented. In fact, when the citizenship rules were notified by the government, United States commented. Not just CAA, when the farm laws were passed. When there were protests against the farm laws, United States commented on India's internal matter. Similarly, when Article 370 was diluted, although America supported it in some way, but then it also raised concerns about the so-called human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, how should we deal with the situation? This editorial says New Delhi gets easily provoked. Easily provoked in the sense, it is immediately countering these countries. For example, calling the German officer to the South Bloc, after which Germany backed down, climbed down from its rhetoric. Similarly, asking the US official to come and explain, and clear communication was sent to United States that you should not meddle in our internal affairs. This editorial says that New Delhi gets easily provoked. Then what is the alternative? This editorial says, instead of getting easily provoked, what India can do, it can do 2 things. One, it can choose to continue this high decibel conflict with United States, and instead what we can do, we can also comment on United States internal politics. We can also comment on the gun laws that United States have. We can also comment on the racial discrimination in United States. In fact, when India was about to get independence, there was one prime minister from Britain who said, if India was ever to be given independence, it will be run by the goons. We were considered the land of snake charmers. It was considered to be white man's burden to civilize the uncivilized Indians. But in one fell swoop, on the 26th of January 1950, we gave right to vote to everybody, to every adult, regardless of gender, regardless of educational qualification, regardless of economic status. When did United States and UK give right to vote to their women? In the 1920s. We are the world's largest democracy, and that is reflected in the way we transfer the power. When Dr. Manmohan Singh lost the election in 2014, he did not, like Donald Trump, stop the transfer of power, incite people to violence. We did not do that. There was a smooth, genuine transfer of power. And that is what this editorial says. India is not showing confidence about its own democratic record. Despite the flaws that we may have, we are still a vibrant, flourishing democracy where the transfer of power takes place smoothly, unlike in the United States. We are a country where we have had a woman prime minister. We have had a woman president. We have a woman president. We have had women chief ministers. Name the first US woman president. You can't, because they never had a woman president. Easily provoked? Either India should give back, according to this editorial, in the same high decibel fashion, or it should sit quiet, have broad shoulders, be thick-skinned when it comes to such criticism, and let its own democratic record speak for itself. That's what you need to understand from this editorial. Clear? Let's look at something else, the countdown to a pandemic treaty. Now, this column is something that we will not discuss in great detail. I will just give you a few highlights. Why? Because this is an ongoing development. This may happen, this may not happen. What will be the content of this treaty? We would not know unless and until we go by the end of this week. By the end of this week, we will see the text of this treaty may be finalized, and we may see that in May, it will be put to vote at the World Health Organization, according to the Constitution of the World Health Organization. Long story short, we are closer to a pandemic treaty. COVID-19 pandemic. What caused it? We don't know. Whether it was artificially created in the laboratories of China in Wuhan, or whether it is a natural phenomena, we would not know. How these pathogens, and what are these pathogens? Organisms which produce diseases, which cause diseases. How these pathogens operate, function, what are their internal dynamics? For that there should be research, and the research should be shared. Technology should be shared. We saw some kind of vaccination nationalism during the COVID-19 pandemic, where some countries refused to even provide vaccination to other countries. Africa, which is a poor continent, they were deprived of vaccines just because they are poor and they can't afford it. So we need something called equity. And for that, we need a pandemic treaty so that we are prepared for the pandemic. So that our response to how we respond to this pandemic, there has to be a proper treaty. There is a text available, and according to this author, we may also have a conference of parties. Conference of parties to oversee the implementation of this treaty. Now, what is the highlight of this? What is the biggest advantage of this? If indeed this pandemic treaty will have a conference of parties to oversee the implementation of this treaty, that means this treaty will be under Article 19 of the Constitution of the World Health Organization. And what is this Article 19 of the Constitution of the World Health Organization? That means it is equally binding on all. There is no such thing as opt out. No country can opt out of this policy, opt out of this treaty. Unlike if you have Article 21, which says the Health Assembly, the World Health Organization Health Assembly, it will have the authority to adopt regulations concerning sanitary quarantine requirements and other procedures which are designed to spread international spread of diseases. What are these norms that we should keep in mind if we need to quarantine people so that they do not result in the spread of diseases? Nomenclatures with respect to diseases, causes of death, public health practices. On all these things, and there are lots of other things as well, on all these things, guidelines can be, regulations can be made by the Health Assembly. But Article 22 says these regulations will be binding on only those countries, members, who abide by it, who opt for it, and not to those who opt out. So if this pandemic treaty, the text of this pandemic treaty talks about that there may be a conference of party to oversee the implementation of this treaty, it means that this treaty would come under Article 19 of the Constitution, as opposed to Article 21, which has an opt-out clause. But the significant thing about this would be pathogen access and benefit sharing. What is this pathogen access and benefit sharing? Pathogens, organisms which spread diseases in the host. If there are developing countries and there are developed countries, developing countries, they will not share information related to pathogens, the behavior of the pathogens, unless and until they get something in return. There has to be give and take. Because if the information which is shared by these developing countries regarding these pathogens reach the developed countries, they will make vaccines, but these developing countries will not have access to these vaccines. They will be charged for the information that they have shared. They will also make some diagnostic tools which these developing countries will not have access to. They will also develop some tests, some test kits, which these developing countries will not have access to. So if we need to do this, and how do we tackle the situation? For that, there has to be a give and take. And what is that give and take? Developing countries will share information regarding these pathogens. In return, what these developing countries will get, or what these countries will get, they will get 10% products free of charge. So using this information, if there are entities, companies in the developed countries who are making some products, 10% of their products, these countries will get free of charge. And they will also get 10% of the products at not-for-profit price. That means at a price where these companies will not be at loss and they will also not be making any profits. This is going to be the biggest sticking point involving this quid pro quo mechanism. Because what will these countries gain by sharing access to pathogens or information related to pathogens? They should get something in the form of benefit sharing. This text, the current round of negotiations, which is ongoing in Geneva, Switzerland right now, these negotiations end this week. And then the final text, if at all it is to be implemented, will be implemented in the month of May. And once this pandemic treaty is sorted, we will have an elaborate discussion on this. Clear? Let's look at something else. Did electoral bond scheme enable extortion? You don't have to go too deep into this. Just understand this information once, write it down in your notes, and you should be done with this. Because what are electoral bonds? And why these electoral bonds were declared unconstitutional? On that, there is already a detailed video available on our YouTube channel. Please search for that video. That video is by me, that live class was by me, and you will gain, I think, every possible information that you require on electoral bonds. But few more points from this discussion between Anjali Bhardwaj and Subhash Chandra Garg, because Subhash Chandra Garg is the former Finance and Economic Affairs Secretary of the Government of India. He was in charge when this electoral bond scheme was conceptualized by Mr. Jaitley. And he also writes in his book how he held discussions with Mr. Jaitley and how Mr. Jaitley convinced him, because he initially was not convinced about the idea of electoral bonds. But be that as it may, there are agencies, Enforcement Directorate, Income Tax Authorities, Central Bureau of Investigation, who are against some entities. And now as soon as these entities are against these, as soon as these agencies are against these entities, they buy electoral bonds. And when these electoral bonds are bought, the principal benefactor of these electoral bonds, because now the data has been released by the State Bank of India, is the ruling political party. So many companies purchase bonds worth crores of rupees after the ED action, after the Income Tax Authorities action, which speaks volumes about the quid pro quo, which basically means donate money to us and we will stop investigation. For example, critics say that CBI has submitted a closure report on the Air India Indian Airlines merger, or the lease, in which former Civil Aviation Minister Praful Patel was accused. But now Mr. Praful Patel has joined the ruling coalition in Maharashtra, and maybe, I don't know, maybe that is the reason why the closure report has been submitted. That's one. Second, those companies which made massive contributions to political parties through electoral bonds, not just the central government but also the state governments, what they got government contracts, high value government contracts. And that is precisely why the Supreme Court struck down electoral bonds, saying there is always quid pro quo. Companies are profit-making entities. They will donate money to political party not out of some social will, but out of quid pro quo, because they would need contracts. And the public should know. They have the right to know this quid pro quo. Similarly, there are entities which were loss-making or which had just started operating from the pandemic time. They have also started donating crores of rupees to political parties. How would a loss-making company donate money to a political party? This was possible because laws were changed. Laws were changed to allow even the loss-making entities to donate money to political parties through electoral bonds. Because previously, only those companies which have been making profit for the past 3 years could have donated money to political parties. And that too, there was a limit. 7.5% of the aggregate profit in the last 3 years. But now that limit was also removed, and whether you are profitable or loss-making, that was also removed. You could donate money to political party. So in your answers, in your mains-based answers, you can write a couple of lines which can be like this. After the data on electoral bonds was released by the State Bank of India, it was pointed out by activists and organizations that entities which were loss-making had also donated money to political parties through electoral bonds. Entities which were facing action by ED and income tax authorities, after they were raided, they started donating money to political parties. And those who donated money to political parties through electoral bonds in return got high-value contracts by the government, which speaks volumes about the quid pro quo, which was made possible because of these anonymous electoral bonds. Clear? Done? Let's look at something else. Measuring internet freedom in India in the last 10 years. For 5 straight years, India has topped the global list of countries imposing internet bans. 60% of all blackouts recorded in the world between 2016 and 2022 have been in India. Now, it can be either an internet ban, blanket internet ban, no internet whatsoever. And this is something that we saw in Jammu and Kashmir when Article 370 was diluted. And this we are witnessing right now in Manipur because of the clashes between the Kukis and Metis, which now the world has realized is the longest ever internet ban in Manipur. So either it can be a blanket internet ban or it can be blocking public access to websites and apps, which comes under Section 69 of Information Technology Act, where the central government can order these companies to block access to some websites, some portals, some apps. That can also come under internet lockdown. Or it can be reduction of internet speed. Allow internet, but not at 5G or 4G, allow internet at 2G. Reduce the internet speed. So this lockdown or blackout of internet can take various forms and shapes. It can be a complete internet ban, or it can be blocking public access to some websites or apps, or it can be reduction of the internet speed. Matter went to the court. Anuradha Bhasin versus Union of India. Anuradha Bhasin, she is the editor of Kashmir Times. She approached the Supreme Court when there was an internet shutdown in Jammu and Kashmir when Article 370 was diluted. And for 100 days altogether, there was no internet. Or the government has earmarked a place in Kashmir where the journalists could come, and in this location, internet was accessed, and they could use the internet access at this government office to send their articles or columns to be published. This, Anuradha Bhasin said, is violation of freedom of press and as such unconstitutional. Supreme Court said something important in that case. Supreme Court said access to internet is a fundamental right. Because what do we need this internet for? Not just for freedom of speech and expression, but also to carry out any trade, occupation, profession. Because today, because of the e-commerce boom, you can't carry on your trade, occupation, profession without the internet. Children who are accessing education, they need online education, which is the most convenient method of education for children, affordable as well. For that also, they need access to education. And it's about the dignity of individuals. So the court said indefinite shutdowns are unconstitutional. Indefinite shutdowns, that means shutdowns for prolonged period of time with no end in sight, it is unconstitutional. Covering the entire state is also unconstitutional. Because you have to follow something called doctrine of proportionality. What is this doctrine of proportionality? One example that I often give. For example, there is a mosquito and you have to kill this mosquito. What are the different ways you can employ to kill this mosquito? You can use a nuclear weapon. You can use a machine gun. You can use an AK-47 assault rifle. You can use a hand grenade. You can also use the mortine rings if at all they work. You can also use the all-out if it works. So there are different ways you can employ to kill this mosquito. But what is the least restrictive way? Because you can also use nuclear weapon. But that will not only destroy this mosquito, that will destroy the entire population of that area. So you have to find a proportionate way, least restrictive way of achieving your objective. And if your objective is to achieve law and order, maintain public order, if the problem is only at some locations, why do you need to impose the internet ban in the entire state? That is not justified. And supply the reason. Because previously, whenever internet shutdown was imposed, whether you were lowering the internet speed or whether you were banning the internet altogether, no reasons were provided. But now this Anuradha Basin judgment of 2020, Supreme Court has said you have to provide reason. But activists say, experts say, that even this provision is poorly complied with. The government is not complying with this provision or of giving the reasons why we are imposing shutdowns. Long story short, for 5 straight years, India has topped the global list of countries imposing internet bans, with about 60% of all blackouts recorded in the world between 2016 and 2022 having been in India. That is what you need to understand from this article. Let's look at something else. Tech giants facing EU scrutiny. Now, European Union, which is a grouping of 27 European countries. According to European Commission, some large online platforms, they act as gatekeepers in digital markets. For example, you need an information on a doctor. What do? You Google it. Now it has become a verb. Google it. Google is the gatekeeper to this information, to access this information. Similarly, Facebook, Meta, or Google's parent company Alphabet. European Commission, what it has done, it has now provided in September 2023, it has designated 6 companies as gatekeepers. One is Alphabet, which is the parent entity of Google, Amazon, Apple, ByteDance, TikTok, Meta, Facebook, and Microsoft. Now, what will happen because of their designation as gatekeepers? They have to comply with those rules to ensure that there is level playing field, to ensure that users have more choices. And there are 2 important laws in Europe which implement this. One is Digital Markets Act, the other is Digital Services Act, and it seems to be working. How? Apple. Epic Games. They were in conflict. They were in a dispute. Why? Because Epic Games, what it did, it broke the in-app payment rule of Apple. What was that rule? Epic Games is an entity which has various games. These games, where can you download from? App Store? Or Google has its own Play Store? According to Apple, if I am a customer who has purchased this app from the App Store, I have to pay 30% commission to Apple. This was considered to be monopolistic. And this is the reason why some of the popular sites in India were also taken off. Some apps were taken off from the App Store by Apple, from Play Store by Google, such as Shadi.com, Bharat Matrimony, so on and so forth. Why? Because these companies did not agree with paying 30% commission on in-app purchases. But now what Apple has done? Apple had removed some games of Epic Games from its app store because this Epic Games company, it violated the in-app purchase clause of App Store. But now, because of these guidelines, Epic Games has been restored on App Store. Why? Because you have to ensure level playing field. You have to give more choices to users. And what are these choices? Choice number 1. This Digital Markets Act, what it stipulates, that app developers be allowed to steer consumers to offers outside the gatekeeper's app store, that too free of charge. That means you don't have to necessarily make purchases on the app store, because previously the Google had said you can only use our payment gateway for accepting these payments. You can even, as an app developer, direct your customer to App Store, to different platforms outside of the App Store as well. That too free of charge. What is the accusation against Alphabet? The accusation is self-preferencing. What is self-preferencing? I have to Google air tickets. I have to go from Bengaluru to Delhi. I'm Googling it. And Google, the parent organization is Alphabet. Instead of promoting or instead of showing me the results of other ticketing agents, it shows me Google Travel. That means it is preferencing its own entities rather than the competitors, which violates level playing field. I have to book a hotel room for myself and I'm searching on Google. Instead of Google showing other searches or displaying the results of others, it is showing its own entities. That means it is self-preferencing its own verticals over rival services. Similarly, there is an allegation against Meta. In European Union, Meta introduced a policy, just like YouTube does, that if you don't want ads on YouTube, you can have an ad-free premium. For that, you'll have to pay. If you pay, you get the subscription, no ads will be displayed on you. That means you can have ad-free experience in watching videos, including this Hindu newspaper analysis, if you have bought the premium version. Meta has done the same thing with Facebook or Instagram, for example, in European Union. Pay and we will not display ads. You don't pay, we will display ads. But even if you don't pay, but you have not given consent to Meta that you should trade the personal data of these users. Because how are these ads targeted? If you're preparing for the civil services exam, and if you search something related to civil services exam, you will see my ad. Come and attend my workshop. Because the Google knows your data. You're searching something on Google. I want to buy a thermometer. And next time you will go back to Google, you will see a recommendation. Or you open Amazon app, you will see a recommendation. Or you open the Flipkart app, you will see a recommendation, because your details are with these tech giants. And they feed this data to the advertisers, marketers, without your consent. Now, all these entities, they have come under scrutiny. Because the allegation is that they have not complied with the Digital Markets Act. The Digital Markets Act. And if you don't comply with this, what is the fine? 10% of the global turnover will be your fine. Whatever this company's global turnover is, 10% of that would be the fine. And if you repeat it again, then next time it will become 20%. Inquiry, this non-compliance investigations are ongoing. Now we will have to wait and watch how these companies will respond. Clear? We are now closer to the end of this newspaper analysis. One topic specifically for your prelims. Core sector output grows. The growth spurts to 6.7% in February. Those industries, those sectors which form the core of Indian economy, which has an impact on any other industry, those are what we call core sectors. And there are 8 core sectors. And these 8 core sectors put together, they form something called Index of Core Industries. Question has been asked previously in one of your prelims examination. Arrange the sectors in terms of their weightage, because in this index, what is the weightage of individual sectors? Highest weightage is to petroleum. Lowest weightage is to fertilizers. And it is this fertilizer, keep in mind, whose production has fell 9.5% to record the sharpest contraction since May 2021. This can also be the statement. Fertilizer output has consistently shrunk since May 2021. But this index of 8 core industries, they have a combined share of 40.27% in the index of industrial production. So there is another index. One is index of 8 core industries, the 8 core sectors which form the Indian economy. This index of 8 core industries, it is released by every month by the Office of the Economic Advisor, Department of Promotion and of Industry and Internal Trade, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. But this index of 8 core industries, it comprises 40.2% of the index of industrial production, which gives growth rates of different industry groups in a period. And this is released every month. And who releases this index? CSO, Central Statistical Organization. Clear? Let's look at 2 practice questions for your mains examination. Question number 1. The impact of internet shutdowns is only growing as more and more people rely on an internet connection for their social and economic livelihoods. Write an answer to this in 250 words. Question number 2. What is a living will? Why did the Supreme Court modify the rules in 2023 regarding the living will? Because these rules were unworkable. These rules which were made, issued in 2018, those were unworkable because of the reasons we discussed. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. If you have enjoyed the session, if you have understood, which is more important, do not leave without pressing the like button, and do let me know in the comment section what is your opinion or take on the launch of our Conquer Prelims program in the first week of May, where we will cover last year's current affairs, subject by subject, specifically for your 2024 prelims. Thank you so much for staying with me. Have a great weekend ahead, a great day ahead. Thank you. Bye-bye.